One morning here in Makaha, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm in a different time zone. And I got to thinking about Hawaii. The psychologists say that nothing that happens in our life is not recorded. Everything that happens is somehow recorded inside. I don't know exactly how that happens, but it happens. Maybe it's on a hard disk or on a DVD or something like that. But I got to thinking about that, because take, for example, 32 years ago, there's a little girl kneeling on the earth, and she's got small seeds in her hand, and she's talking to those seeds, she's talking to the earth. She puts the seeds in the earth very gently, covers it over, and she supports those seeds as they grow. And so if you're making some kind of a report about that, then you think, well, she was able to grow beans and then she brought them home, they cooked them and they ate them. That's the external part of it. But there's also an internal part of it that we maybe don't think about so much. One of those things would be she's 5 or 6 years old, and it's the first time in her life that she has some kind of dialogue or conversation with the earth itself. I mean, what's happening there is she's talking to the seas, but she's also talking to the earth. Something that maybe she'll lose as she grows older. Unfortunately, there are not many so-called sophisticated adults who know how to talk to the earth, how to to have some kind of a connection, dialogue with the environment that they live in. Well, that's number one. But number two, she is supporting life. As the plant grows, she is supporting the growth. She is a she, but it's also true of he's. The boys kind of lose that idea of supporting life. Number three, it has something to do with who she is. She understands something about herself because she has planted those seeds in the earth, but it tells her something about who she is. Number four, she's also in a group. She's with boys and girls, and they're talking about it. And they probably talk about it not only here at Hawaii, but in the classroom. And when she goes home, she tells her parents. And there are even more internal effects that I can't even think of. So what I'm trying to point out is there's these two aspects. There's the external, and that's how everything is judged, by the external. But that internal part of it, like maybe she's a married woman now and has children and things. Somehow there is that correspondence with what she experienced when she was 5 years old. Now that thing about the internal and the external, you could look at all the programs here at Hawaii and start talking about them. Like I can remember once when we were doing an interview, these are sixth grade children who had built a garden, and one of them said, what happened in this garden, I used to just talk to my classmates, but since we worked together on this garden, I've talked to everybody. That kind of blows your mind a little bit to think that somebody who only talked to an exclusive group now talks to everybody. My God, if that were true worldwide, you wouldn't have the world that we live in right now. So what I was thinking is, suppose you went through all of the activities here on the farm and you separated the internal from the external. We know the external because they have to make reports about how many kids came and what they did, etc. But that internal part of it, we only get glimpses of it when people talk about it, or we ask them about it, or you have some kind of a reflection. But it would be almost impossible to summarize how many activities are here. It must be in the hundreds, I don't know. Put that aside in one column, and let's look at another aspect of this whole thing. How many people have come here in the last 35 years? When you stop to think of the children from the school, from kindergarten to grade 6 who come here every day over the course of I don't know how many years. And they came with the teachers. And I assume that the admin somehow sat down and talked about this. So there's that whole thing. But there's also all these buses that used to come every day from all over the island. And on those buses would be not only the children, but parents who came along with them and teachers. When you stop to think of the people in the community who have been involved in programs here, not the container gardens, for example, the work days, the peace center that's here, the women's group that doesn't formally meet but has continued, over a long period of time, that side of feminism. When you stop to think of the people who come from other places, from the Philippines, from Italy, from Japan, from many, many countries. Just the other day, we were walking outside and there's an old couple who went to the old age home and they thought they would stop in here and they only stayed for a few minutes. If we start trying to add up all of those people, they would be maybe hundreds of thousands of people have come here over a period of 35 years. So now to put those two things together, we know, what they did formally, the activities and even the non-activities, they just came to visit. But that internal part of it, we don't know exactly. And there's no way of being able to summarize that, There's a man who wrote a book called, his name is Rudolf Otto, and he wrote about awe. The word awesome has become so common that it's lost its original meaning. People will say, the meal that we just had was awesome, the suit that you have on is awesome, etc. But originally, in that book, The Idea of the Holy by Rudolf Otto, awesome can only be used in reference to God. That somehow you cannot, with your mind, wrap around the idea of meeting God. And so he said, the only thing that happens is when you have some kind of an encounter with God is you're in awe, meaning to say there's no way of being able to express it. It's not an intellectual thing. It's not even a feeling thing. It's overwhelming, Well, I kind of want to put that together because, when you stop to think of the projects that are all over the world, for example, the United Nations right now is doing an evaluation of the last 5 years of its development goals. And so they can measure what's happened in the last 5 years in all countries of the world in regard to poverty, in regard to healthcare, in regard to women's movement, etc., etc. And I myself have sat in on meetings where they're planning, because it finishes next year, 2015. So 2015 to 2020, they're going to measure how do we continue working on the poverty level, working on the health level, etc. And that's good. It's good that they do that. And they're not the only ones who do that. The World Bank does it. The big NGOs do it, Oxfam and Red Cross, etc., etc. They're all working on changing the structures that we live in, which is a very good thing to do. In some way, Hawaii is different from that. I mean, there are those effects that people are a little bit better off because they have vegetables, because they work, because they have a garden, etc. But it's the internal more than the external that Hawaii is all about, no? And so in some way, my own feeling is that this is a sacred place. People have encountered God in that internal thing, that they know something about themselves. They know something about the world that we live in, about the earth, about the relationships with one another, about even who they are. And so it's a very humbling kind of thing to think, I mean, this is not a huge project, and this is not the center of not only the world, but this is also not the center of Hawaii. This is like the tail end of Hawaii. And yet, for the last 35 years, you have people coming here. For example, we had a photo exhibit during the anniversary, and one of the children said something like, "When I'm here, I'm alive." Now, how do you measure that? There's no way of measuring that. And another child said, of all, actually, he was comparing being in school and being here, but we didn't put the whole quote in there. But he says, when I'm here, this is the best place. In other words, what people are saying is that somehow they come to meet themselves when they're here. Not only do they meet themselves, but they meet God in some way. It's to evaluate this project on the external level is very easy, but to do it on the internal level, they often use the expression, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and you feed him for the rest of his life. And they say that as if it's a panacea, as if it's a cure-all. Once you teach him how to fish, then his problems are solved. The problem with that is that this guy who we taught how to fish now has people working for him and he oppresses them. Meaning to say, what Gandhi said, what difference does it make if a person's status is raised but that person remains the same? And what I'm trying to say is, Hawaii in some way makes different people. I mean, this is not, there is a school next door and there are classes that go on here, but strictly speaking, this is not an educational program. What Martin Buber, the famous Jewish philosopher, said is, God is not me, God is not you, but God is in the relationship that we have with one another. And if there's anything that this, and I don't know what word to use because I hate the word project because it sounds so mechanical. I don't even like program. But in some way, what happens here is no one is the teacher. And in fact, in the photo exhibit, one of the teachers says something like that. She said, I like to come here with the kids because I can learn something as well. And one of the parents says something like, we not only have to teach the children, we have to learn from them. In other words, what people are saying is somehow we meet one another around what's happening here at Ho'a'ina. And so the bottom line is, this is really a sacred place. And people have found something about them, like that little girl 32 years ago, people have found out something about themselves, about the earth, and about each other. Now, how do we know this? Well, I would say we know this first of all because of ourselves. I can say personally, I'm not the person I was when I first came here 35 years ago. And that's not only due to Ho'a'ina, but in part it is due to Ho'a'ina. And Gigi is not the founder or the teacher. Gigi is a participant who has also talked with people in this program. He has also entered into dialogue with the earth and with the people who have come here. And so I guess the best word would be a meeting place or relationships or something like that, but it really is a sacred place. Gigi, I thought of one more thing that I didn't put on here. People often say that Gigi left the priesthood, but in my own opinion, Gigi has found a way of doing priesthood in a better way.
Amen.